to Miss Eva O'Toole, and she is going to read you the bio of our next presenter.
Okay, our next presenter is Courtney Roberts. Courtney has a bachelor's degree in human services with a concentration on children and family services. She's obtaining her master's in jurisprudence in child law and policy from Loyola University. She has worked in elementary education as well as for the state of Indiana, assisting applicants with Medicaid and food stamp resources. Courtney became a CASA in May of 2019, first working as the volunteer coordinator in Washington County, and later transferred to Floyd County to work as a staff advocate. Courtney became involved with CASA because she saw a huge need for strengthening families. Courtney believes children thrive in environments of stability and love, as well as with their parents when possible. When it's not possible and safe for children to remain with their parents, she believes they need an unbiased voice advocating for their best interests.
Quite possibly the cutest presenter. That's my daughter. Click on something.
It might turn off. They set me up like that too.
I don't do the technology, so. Still all the power now. So what, the arrow forward? Okay. All right, I'm gonna talk to you a little bit today about the courtroom, preparing and questioning, and a couple other things while we're talking. So we'll try to make it slow. Sometimes I just have like thoughts. I'm like, oh, I want to share that. And that's what we do with this. So if I get it out, keep up. All right. So we're going to talk about meeting with your case coordinator, getting direct information, the child's wishes, questions for the courtroom, and CFTMs and self-care. Also, I acknowledge that sometimes we just kind of throw out new information that you're like, oh, I haven't learned that. It's because we are just observing things as we go along, and sometimes see that things might need to be tweaked so that we are stronger in our advocacy. We also have a new judge, and that presents new challenges and ideas that we're like, okay, we need to make sure. So if we're sharing stuff that you feel like is a change, it's because we are changing, we're evolving, and we want to do that, and we just want to make sure that you all are prepared to do that with us. So meeting with your case coordinator, as hopefully you all get to meet with them quite regularly. We are kind of aware that we don't always look at, so when you have a CFTM, they should be sending you your CFTM note maybe within 7 days as per their policy. So I know sometimes you will get an email from your FCM or from somebody on staff at DCS that says CFTM notes. It should be the notes that were from your last CFTM that you attended. You may not get those. You are, per policy, supposed to receive them within a week. And if you do get them, maybe you don't all read them. I don't think that I always read them. I'm like, oh, okay, put it in the file. We just got these notes. I realize that we really do need to be reviewing them. We need to be reading them. So we would like for you to keep track. If you attended a CFTM, make a little note in your calendar for a week out or so that says, did I get my notes? If you didn't get the notes within 10 business days of when you attended that CFTM, we would like you to reach out to the FCM and say, hey, I didn't get the notes. Could you send them to me? When you get the notes, the next time that you, certainly review them yourself. And then the next time that you meet with your case coordinator, you could review them together. We're wanting you to look at those just to make sure that the information is accurate to what you actually discussed in the CFTM. And not to say that it's not always accurate, but we do notice sometimes DCS copies and pastes things from like the very first CFTM to maybe like the 27th CFTM, says the exact same thing. And we're trying to just maybe check them on that and say, hey, actually at this last CFTM, I brought up these concerns and they're not noted in the notes, and I would like you to correct that, because that is happening sometimes. And then I've noticed it because I get to court and I'm like, well, I know we talked about this in the CFTM, so I'm gonna shove it in their face. And then I look at these CFTM notes and I'm like, it doesn't even say that we talked about that. And then I'm powerless, I can't bring it up. So we wanna just make sure that those notes are accurate to what was actually discussed. Also, you are going to talk about the current visitation plan quite a bit with your case coordinator. So I think that those of you who attended the last training that we had, we did talk about changing the court reports and that we're putting a section in there about the current visitation plan and then an explanation on your thoughts on that. Yes,
Sorry, when you say case coordinator, do you mean?
Kayla,
Okay,
for you.
okay.
Kayla for all of you. Yeah, yeah. You're going to, in your court report, put your thoughts on the current visitation plan. So when you're going to that CFTM or when you're meeting with your case coordinator, you should know what that current visitation plan is, and if not, reach out to the FCM. And sometimes it changes without us knowing that it changed. They add on hours, days, they reduce the supervision. So that's just another thing that we want to stay on top of. Okay. So contact the key members of the team. So going directly to the source, I know I've talked about this before. I think that it's really important for our courtroom testimony that we're giving information that we gained from the right person. So an example of not the right person would be, I know you guys have regular communication with placements and that's great and that's expected. But when you get a phone call from placement that's like, well, the teacher has concerns, call the teacher. If you have a conversation with placement that says, they said the visits are going horribly, call the visit supervisor. Because we don't really want to take to court what placement told us. Sometimes the information they receive is just a little bit biased because maybe they want the visits not to go good. And so you really want to hear from the visit supervisor or from the teacher what those concerns are, so that when you testify, you're saying, I spoke with the teacher and this is what the teacher said. Also be aware that the public defenders are likely to try to pick apart any information that you present. So if you say, well, the foster mom told me, yeah, make sure that you can stand there and say, this is the date I spoke to the visit supervisor, this is what happened. We want to remove a lot of emotion from our testimony, which is really hard to do. I know a lot of you have been on cases, even on them for a short amount of time, you're emotional because of what's happening in the case, what treatment the child is getting, what the parents are or not doing. So I really want to help you all present a lack of emotion, but really strong facts. So I think some language to help with that would be, say you want to just make the statement, mom can't reunify because she's angry and unstable. Might be true. In some cases, it probably is true, but a judge can't really issue an order on mom can't reunify because she's angry and unstable. What he could possibly use for his order is mom threw her phone at the wall during a visit. That's a prime example of mom showing instability and a lot of anger. Or mom was verbally aggressive to the children. Better than just saying mom's volatile, mom's violent. We need to have facts to back it up. So just change your opinion to something that you can substantiate with facts. Another one is, well, dad just misses all of his visits. Oh, I can tell you if you just say dad's not attending any visits or he misses all the visits, the public defender is going to be questioning you pretty strictly of, well, what do you mean? I had one actually ask me to do a percentage equation on the stand. And he was like, oh, so you said he doesn't do any of his visits, right? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. So it says right here, you know, in our report that he attended like 2. So I'm like, okay, so he attended like 8 out of 10. I think that's 80%, right? Because he was like, oh, what, are you a mathematician? I mean, they can be pretty ridiculous just to try to trip me up and get me to be like, okay, well, I guess he attends most of them. No, he like attended 2 out of 10. Like that's not attending any visits. So try to come in with the numbers, come in with something that's like a substantial fact and not just a general statement. with our new judge, one of the things that we are really happy for is that he gives us a voice pretty naturally, but also something that we weren't really prepared for. Staff wasn't super prepared for it, so we know that the volunteers aren't going to be prepared for it when it happens, so we want to make sure that you are. So when he goes around the courtroom to the DCS, the public defenders, the parents, he also says, Casa, do you have any questions? For every single witness, he is giving us the opportunity to question them, which is great. Most of the time, we don't have questions. But there are times when we could have questions, and we want you all to feel comfortable asking those questions, especially on the record. But we also were thinking, what would be good questions to ask in court and what would be not good questions to ask in court? And this is of the FCM and of the parents.
What's a good question?
What is a good question
Yeah,
to ask?
yeah.
One side you ask. Hang tight and I'll get to that. What's your favorite superhero? Has nothing to do with
It's Iron Man.
It's nerd talk. So we don't want you to be concerned when judge says, Casa, do you have any questions? At least for a while, if not always. I mean, I think all of you volunteers usually have a staff member there with you. So if you don't have a staff member there with you and you feel like you might be uncomfortable when he asks you if you have questions, send a text to Lauren or your case coordinator, so we'll make sure that you have somebody there with you. If you ever happen to be there and there isn't a staff member, feel free to ask a question if you have one. Judge is certainly never going to think that a question from Casa is a stupid question or the wrong question. You might catch a little side eye from one of the other persons in the court, but all it really matters is the judge. Rhonda?
Well, I was actually observing last week when Justin asked the question. And the effect to me was that he asked for clarification of something that was said. And that brought that to the front, that reminded everybody that this is the case, and I thought that was really good.
So I think as you're working a case, all of you will probably come up with questions that you have. Before you had a CFTM, sometimes the CFTMs aren't held as regularly as we would like. So you're probably out there going, well, I wonder if they even drug screen mom, or is mom doing all of her services? And are the kids going to school? You know, things like that you don't have the answer to. A CFTM would have been the best place to get the answer to. Or if the DCS worker would return your phone call, you maybe would have the answers to, but there are some FCMs that don't return phone calls to Casa. And so you're kind of heading into court still with these unanswered questions. So anything that you have a question on, I would like you to write it down. Our case coordinators are now super prompted to meet with you within 30 to 45 days before you have a hearing and bring those questions to them. They will help you weed out whether that would be a question you ask in court versus do we need to call for a CFTM before we go to court and try to get the answers to it, or do we need to just sit down and make a phone call to a service provider to try to get the answer to that question. So before you get into court, hopefully most of those questions would be answered. But then when you get to court, if that question wasn't answered, you're going to ask. So the FCM gave their testimony. That's the other thing. When you're sitting in court and the FCM is giving their testimony, Judge Brown has shortened their testimony, where I think all of you are used to hearing them go over the entire progress report. And that's really not the way that they're doing things now. Now he's just taking judicial notice of that report and moving on. So there might be an issue with taking judicial notice of a report that maybe isn't 100% accurate. So if you can get into the practice of reading those progress reports when you get them, I think all of you should receive them in an email form, because Kerma gets them when they're filed, and she usually distributes it to both you and your case coordinator. So read over that progress report, and you're also looking for accuracy. If any of you have questions about how to read the progress report, if they're not super user friendly, then ask your case coordinator and they can help you. But the things you're going to look for in those progress reports are how many CFTMs did they have this review period? And then when you read that, you're gonna say, well, I wasn't invited to any CFTMs, but it looks like they had 3, or, you know, I was invited to 1 and they had 4. You want to look for that because you want to know if you're being included. They should have the permanency plan listed in that progress report, so make sure that that permanency plan is what you believe the current permanency plan was. They should have something in there about the current visitation level in their progress report, so that's just another way for you to check it. And then they should have some additional information about what parents are doing. So read through that, and if there's something in that progress report that DCS files, do you all understand what I mean when I say the progress report? So the FCM, usually a month before any hearing, files a report with the court. We do ours like 2 weeks before, but the FCMs do theirs about a month before. So that's what you're looking at, and you're going to check that for accuracy. If there's something that's not accurate in that progress report, then you can note that in your CASA report when you write it. You could just state, you know, CASA received the progress report filed by the FCM. However, here's some areas that CASA thinks may not meet up with what our beliefs were. When you're giving your courtroom testimony, and we have talked about this previously, to make sure that you're always asking the child every time you meet with the child, age appropriately, but it could be 3 or 4 and they're able to tell you what they wish for. Every time you meet, we just try to work it into your conversation with them. What would you wish for? And you'd be surprised, some 3-year-olds are going to tell you something about mom or dad that they wish for. And then some 12-year-olds are going to say they wish for $1 million. So every single conversation, just what do you wish for? And if it's appropriate to use the language of what would you like the judge to know, ask them so that we can report it every single time we go to court. And if you ask every single time, then you will see if it changes or if it stays the same. And I think it gives you a good gauge of what the child is understanding about what's happening in their case, but also their emotions do change. And say, you know, the last time you asked them, their statement was, I just want to go home. And the next time you ask them, it's, I don't ever want to see my mom again. You're going to want to know why, what happened. And it could be therapy. It could be something happened at a visit, but that's a good way, you know, to prompt that. When you give your verbal testimony, when the court goes around and asks if you have anything to add, I think that's the best thing to verbally add, so that everybody on that case in that room hears CASA say, this is what the child wishes and this is what the child wants the judge to know. I do believe that he reviews our reports, but I think there's always a lot going on and he's reading a lot and hearing a lot on the case. So I would appreciate if every time that we give verbal testimony, it is specific to what that child has said and what that child wants.
Thank you. Just everybody be aware, he absolutely takes notes at 100%. And if you say something that is important, I can guarantee you through experience, it's written down. If it's not written down by him, it was written down by Mary, who's next to him up there, and they are definitely listening. So not in your report, put it in your report, but then also, he is listening when you talk.
So
Before you move on the last slide, I think it's probably important to specify though, that a lot of the children are used to situations that are not acceptable, and so the wishes they give us may not be what we can repeat in court.
So on that note, if you feel uncomfortable saying it out loud, I think it still needs to be in your report. So we do run into this quite a bit where you as a CASA with your training and you're advocating for what's in the child's best interest is not always exactly what the child wants you to convey. So I think we have to do 2 jobs. I think we have to convey what that child wants us to say. So you could say, the child wishes to go home, although you know the parents aren't appropriate and that's not going to be in their best interest. So you can say the child wishes to return home. However, it is not in their best wishes at their best interest at this time because, and elaborate on that further for the court. But I think that, in my opinion, we're the voice for the child and we can't be the voice of the child if we change what the child says. And I've had a lot of cases, especially with older youth, where I can say, I appreciate that this is your wish and this is what you want, I don't support that, but I will make sure that the courts know that that's what you want. That way the child knows I'm being honest with them, but I'm not, I mean, I'm doing their justice by saying it for them, even if I don't agree with it. But I also make sure that the courts know I don't agree with this, but this is what the child wants. So appropriate questions to ask in court. I think we have run into this quite a bit recently. It's probably been going on more than recently, and we are just becoming more aware of it. DCS, in their testimony, depending on how they want the case to go, may say, the parents are passing all their drug screens. Well, then we have been reviewing drug screens and realized the parents are passing all their drug screens, but DCS only drugged them once in 4 months. Well, that was pretty easy to pass, because they probably also called ahead. Just saying. So I think that if you have concerns that when DCF says the parents are passing all their drug screens is not a true picture of what's happening in the case, an appropriate question, and if you put an ask this at a CFTM ahead of time, when the judge says, does DCF or does CASA have any questions, you could say, sure, I heard they're passing all their drug screens. How many times have they been screened this review period? Or if you say, how often is the parent submitting the drug screens, and DCS says randomly, okay, then how many have you given this? Because randomly, once every 3 months is random. How many have you given? Because I think that, I know CASA has the thought process, and I'm assuming the court also thinks that when you give an order on that dispositional that says you're gonna do random drug screens, it's more than just once a quarter. They are maybe expecting twice a week, but I'm not gonna tell you when I'm gonna call you in for it. So I think it's important to start bringing a lot of that to the surface to present to the courts that although they're passing them all, they're really not taking any. You want a drug screen?
So I just think for the public defender this year, because, I just want to make sure we don't. I mean, because he's one of the more difficult public defenders right now, because he's very, very, very frustrating. And I think that's, he gets under your skin.
Also why we invited him.
Yes. So it's Koi Light, that's a Koi 2.0. So if you say, hey, I don't, yeah, they passed the drug screen, but only they only took ones in about 4 months. If I'm him, that's a reasonable argument. It's, hey, you only asked her to take one. Did you raise this concern? Is this concern documented somewhere? If you have a concern and DCF does not seem to be addressing it because they won't, and they do that. Like that's a thing that they do. They'll just kind of ignore that. Let your case coordinator know, like, let them know, because we can try to reach out to the appropriate person or something, because that is an argument that's coming up more and more in court these days, is where if this was such a concern, did you call a hotline? That's becoming an argument used against us, and so we should utilize state resources and waste time to do something that they should be doing already. So now we're gonna call the hotline, they're gonna send out an assessment worker and whatnot. It's ridiculous, but that is something that they're doing now. So just be aware that the public defenders, especially when they're in kind of agreement with DCS on any certain issue, they're gonna argue together with that. Well, they only asked her once. Why should she be held, like, why is she being held at fault for only doing one when she was only asked to do one? Even though you know he or she should be doing a lot more. Like, it's easy to keep one drug screen when you know it's coming. So just be aware, and that's a topic that also comes up with physical abuse, emotional abuse, any of those topics that are like, hey, this should be being addressed, but it's not. Their argument's gonna be, did you call the hotline and where's the document? Because other than that, you have no argument, and they're gonna try to like pound that in court. Look, they think it's a concern today, but they didn't think it was such a concern to call the hotline, so why are we gonna change anything about it?
Today's public defender's famous quote that he uses in almost every testimony is that CASA wants to move to carrot. So if we come in and we're like, oh, well, they didn't take enough drug screens, well, CASA's moving to carrot. They took drug screens, CASA doesn't like it, so we're just gonna make it harder and harder. And so we just wanna show, no, this was our understanding of what was expected, and they're not meeting that standard, which is also where some of the tweaks to the court report have come from of, we're gonna make a statement every time we write a court report of what the current visitation plan is and what we want to see happen in order for that to change, so that he can't say we're moving the carrot. No, look, 6 months ago, I put in my report that in order for them to have less supervision in a visit, they needed to be clean of all illegal substances and their home conditions needed, all of that. And they've not addressed that. So I'm not changing, I'm not moving, I'm showing you what I wanted, and they're not meeting that standard. So we just want to remove some of their ability to pick us apart as much as possible. Melissa, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to drag out the whole drug screen issue. In my case, it seems like the parent just drug screens when it's convenient for them. They're called in for a drug screen, but they just do it on their own time. And sometimes it seems like it's a very timely issue, like if we're acting right, they should be drug screened now.
Right.
So
it sounds like
I'm
you're
gonna ask that
manipulating
question
that.
forward and-
I think that you should start with the FCM. And I think that, and we have that in a lot of cases where random drug screens means when DCS requests it, not when the parent requests it, because these parents are very savvy, and I don't know all the tricks, but there's tricks out there to pass a drug screen, even if you've used recently, and the parents all know that. So if you're supposed to come in for a drug screen on a Monday and you show up on Tuesday or Wednesday and DCS is like, all right, well, they screen, no, we want them on Monday because we want to know what they did Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if they don't come Monday and they wait and show up Tuesday, Wednesday, they've had 3 to 5 days, it's likely out of their system, they're gonna pass that drug screen, but you're like, no, they're probably still using. It should be requested by DCS. So one way to get around that, if a parent wants, if they're gonna do my phone never works, or I don't have transportation, or whatever their reason is for not being able to come when DCS calls, then you can request that they have to come to the DCS office or do Courtroom, or that's the drug screening company that you have to call in every day. But you can have it set up so they have to come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday to the DCS office to do a screen, and FCM should be able to coordinate that. I've got a couple cases where that's kind of what we've gotten down to, because the parents have fought so much about random and call-ins. If you do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, there's really not a window for error, because you're gonna catch what they did on the weekend, and then they're gonna do another one on Wednesday, and then they're gonna do one on Friday, so that 3 to 5 day window is covered. If it's a major problem, and they're not screening somewhere else that's valid. Irma?
So I have a question, kind of maybe a little bit of a suggestion. First of all, it's, when you were talking about the CFTM notes, could we maybe make that one of our go-tos when we go to the CFTM, is what's the plan for the drug screen? The other part is there a standard, like, if Elena and I were both parents, would I have a different drug screen plan than she does, or is there?
Well, a non-custodial likely has no drug screen plan because they're a non-offender, and it's really hard to get drug screens ordered. You have to have a significant reason to order a parent to submit to drug screens. So you certainly may have a parent who possibly should have had to have drug screens, but is not under dispo for that, because that's not the reason that we got involved.
So if we asked at every CFTM, like, what's the drug screen plan here? How long am I asking them to screen?
I think if they're under dispo for random drug screens, you certainly should ask that at a CFTM.
So we would have that in court.
Yeah, I think you should. I think especially if you have concerns. Now, if you don't have regular CFTMs, that becomes a problem. If some CFTMs just are not of good quality and you're not gonna get answers from any parent because they're triggered by cost of space, or they're triggered by 100 other things, and it's just not, then just send an email to your FCM, because then you'll also have it in writing. Like, if you come out of that CFTM and you're like, I really wanted to get the answer to this, but mom was spiraling, send a follow-up email and say, hey, I wanted to ask this, I didn't get it ahead of time. What is the current plan for drug screens? And if it seems too generic, then you can say, well, I think we need to step it up. I feel like there might still be concerns there. So another example of a question, something that you will hear DCS say often in court is that the parents are complying with the terms of their dispositional. I hear it sometimes and I'm like, they are? I don't think they are. That means that DCS wants the case to progress and they don't really want to shine light on things that the parents aren't doing. So one question you could ask an FCM when they say that the parents are complying with all the terms of the dispositional is make them answer to whether they feel like the parents are progressing. Because I have a specific case right now where even the FCM doesn't feel like the parents are progressing. And even the FCM wants TPR to happen on the case, but every single time he testifies, he says, well, the dad is compliant with the dispositional. And I'll go to him afterwards, I'm like, why did you say that? Well, he shows up for all of his home-based casework and he shows up for his home-based therapy. Okay, but you said that when he goes, he just keeps defending himself and repeating the same thing and he's not actually engaging in the services. So can you not differentiate when you say he's compliant, but he's not progressing or he's not engaging? Well, yeah, I could. So you can make him do that or her, make the FCM answer to that. Say, okay, so they showed up for all of them. Does the service provider feel like they're progressing? Are they utilizing the skills they're learning in home-based casework in real life? And I think that would be an appropriate non-emotional question to ask because that's going to start that conversation where sometimes FCMs are given direction maybe by supervisors not to overshare. And I think that we have every right to kind of pull out that extra information that maybe the FCM even wants to give. We just have to give them the avenue to say it. So there are other questions that maybe are not good for court, but would be more appropriate for a CFTM. I definitely think there are times when you can be more direct in a CFTM. You might have to save it towards the end if there's other goals that they want to get to in that CFTM. We hadn't talked about this a little bit in our office and maybe had a little bit of fun with it, but one of the questions, we have a current child with a lot of educational neglect and the case coordinator was like, what is the problem with getting your kid on the bus? Just get your kid on the bus. We don't want to ask that in court. However, I think in a CFTM, you could say, what is the problem with you getting your child on the bus? Why are they not getting to school? It might sound a little accusatory, but it also might allow the parent to be like, I don't have an alarm clock. I've had a parent say that before. Or I was out all night and I couldn't wake up in time, or we don't have breakfast. I don't know, whatever the reason is, it will still give them room to kind of come up with an excuse or a reason. And then that gives you the opportunity to offer a solution and then present that to the court. This was their hang up. We offered this suggestion. And then if we still are not getting them on the bus when you get to court, then you can bring it up as here's the roadmap and they're not taking it. I think then to bring it back to building that rapport, when you go to a CFTM, ask the parents, is there anything that you need from the team? Is there anything that we can offer for you that you're not getting? And don't assume that DCS is giving parents everything they need to succeed. They might not be. And I think it builds that relationship from you all to just say, I see that you're struggling with this. What can I do to help you? And see if there's resources that we can help them find or to offer them. And then really an important question for every single CFTM you attend is, do you understand what's on your dispositional? Sometimes you're going to get an answer, sometimes you're not going to get an answer, but we need to ask about that dispositional every single time we have an actual CFTM, because then we can come to court and say, we had a CFTM, we went over the dispositional with the parents, so we know that they know what they have to do in order to reunify, and they're still not doing it. DCF doesn't always go over the dispositional in their CFTMs because they might have one goal and they go into that CFTM and they're only addressing that one goal, and there's 27 other lines on that dispositional. So we want to make sure that we're asking them.
9 times out of 10, that parent has never read that dispositional order ever. I have 9.9 times out of 10 they have not read it. I think Courtney and I, when I was at DCF, attempted to go over dispo with the parent one time, and it did not end well. Because a lot of them don't read it, they don't know what's in there, and they don't like being held accountable.
No, and then when you tell them, they're like, I don't have to do that. Well, you do, it's the court order. You gotta do this.
Courtney, yeah, also question. my question is, on your questions, is it better, to me, it would be better, instead of asking yes or no questions, to ask it open-ended, so that it requires them more than just to say, no, yes.
Yeah, oh, that's totally,
What help do you need?
Right.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
you
no,
need
that's
help.
fine.
What,
How, yeah, however you can
How can I?
get them to participate in that, yes, that is completely fine. And don't feel like, when we go to CFTMs, I know a lot of times it's like, well, this is DCS, this is CFTM, so they're running the show. I've taken over a lot of CFTMs because I'm not getting the information that I need to advocate for that child. And don't feel bad about that. I mean, you can apologize and say, hey, I'm not trying to take over your CFTM, but, and then start asking your questions, because that's where you need to get that information, and you need to be able to come to court with that information. If you feel like you have a lot that you want to cover, you can email the FCM ahead of time and say, here's some concerns that I want addressed in the CFTM. But you don't have to, just come to the CFTM and ask your questions. And if you're not getting the answers after that, then let your case coordinator know. Lauren?
I was gonna suggest too with some of our parents, who have been in high trauma situations and they're stressed because their children have been removed. It's a stressful environment experience. And when you just offer, hey, can I go over this dispositional with you? I mean, a lot of our parents see that paperwork and are immediately intimidated and triggered by it. And so just, that would help build rapport, and then you're really giving them the basis of understanding what exactly is going on. For a lot of times, our PDs are really busy and they're not able to go over that, that really involved.
I also want to add that looking at when you talk to the parent is really important, especially when you want to share something that's really important. Sometimes I feel it's better when you talk to them outside that formal city and environment. Maybe when they're visiting with their children at some kind of agency, you go there, they tend to open up more to you than when they're in this formal setting and they're all stressed out and that everybody's satisfactory and
Yeah,
so looking, choosing that space.
yeah, and I
That
agree.
makes them very receptive to what you're trying, what you're talking about, and talk to.
Yeah.
Having hard conversations with them.
And I think you all, I mean, a lot of this is case specific. Some of our cases, the only time you're ever gonna see the parent is at a meeting because they're not doing visits and they're not compliant, and the case has been going on for a long time, so you might have a lot, certainly. We all need to be reaching out to parents when they're participating outside of that CFTM to try to set up meetings, and hopefully they're going to accept that and you're able to meet with them, not just in a CFTM. And each case is unique, and you know, you all know what the dynamics are, and there's some times where that's your only opportunity, and then there's other times where hopefully you have that rapport already. And sometimes I've gone to CFTMs where I'm like the only ally for the parent, and they feel like everybody else on the team is there and it's against them. So everything is individual with your cases. So we know testimony is nerve-wracking. We all need to participate in self-care. Always ask for help, ask for support when you feel like you need it, even if you just feel like you're gonna ask the questions, but you want someone to stand up there with you while you ask the questions. If you want to go over things beforehand, and then if you walk out of that courtroom and you're drained and you just feel like you were beat up, ask for someone to take a walk with you. You can take a walk, take some deep breaths, do some self-care, because you're all volunteers, but this is an insane amount of responsibility that you're volunteering for, and it takes an emotional toll. We all identify that, and we want to just make sure that you're as well as possible while you are dealing with it. On that, also, we want to talk about the change in some cases. Most of the cases that we're getting now are in home chins. So the children are never actually removed, but the reasons for the case opening haven't changed. So children are remaining in home with parents who are both under the influence of illegal substances. There's domestic violence in the home. The home conditions are, in my opinion, below minimum standards. a lot of mental illness and the children's are still in that home. A lot of you, when you went through training, the thought was that the children would be in foster homes and you would be meeting with them in those foster homes and in school, and then you would see the parents at meetings or at visits, and that's changed a lot. So when we have new volunteers come in, and even you all, when you leave one case and you're getting a new case, it's likely that all of your interaction is going to be with parents. And that adds a level of sometimes safety, concern, and discomfort. And we want to make sure that you feel comfortable with that. So there's always going to be somebody available to go with you to a home visit if that's something that you feel like you need. Your case coordinator, Lauren, myself, Kerma, we will team up and we will go with you at least until you have that rapport and you feel comfortable. If you don't feel comfortable going into a home where you know there is substance abuse, then never feel uncomfortable saying, I just don't think I'm going to be comfortable with that. And there's zero judgment, because that's a huge change in the dynamic of what we were once used to. I had to do a home visit. Kermit and I went this past week, and I got up to the door and I could hear the dog barking, and I'm not welcome there. And I was like, I've heard enough, let's go. It just wasn't going to be a good time. I wouldn't have felt safe, to be honest. I just didn't. So we decided not to, we watched from the parking lot. So instead, Elena.
And there are cases that even the staff do not go on visits to homes alone. I have a case in particular that I will not go to their house by myself. I will take any other person with me, but I will not go by myself. So do not be afraid to ask for someone to go with you.
And even that change, you might have a great rapport with the parent today and they like you and they're talking to you because of whatever that need is you're meeting for them. And then you go to court and you might stand up and say, I really don't think the child should be in home and I really have concerns and I think the child should be removed or the parent's visit should be supervised. And then you don't want to knock on that door the next day and be like, hey, just said all that stuff about you in court, but you want to hang out? You know, it's not comfortable, and we get that, and we do still have to keep the children safe, and we do still need to advocate for them. And you can see the child at school. We do still have to do some visits in the home, though, when the child is in that home. So even if, you know, every other month you see the child in school, and then you need to go do that home visit. You can also team up with service providers. I don't always advise that you team up with DCS to do your home visits, because we really do want to establish ourselves as not DCS. And I think that it will affect your relationship if every time you go, you're there with DCS. So other people probably besides DCS, unless there's a CFTM in the home, that would be another great time to see the home. But it's just something to be thinking about and be aware of, and just know that we see that and appreciate that. Justin?
And I was in two parts to what she said, and she can attest to this. I've never had somebody in my life like me one day, hate me so much. Like I've never been the most worst person in the entire world. Like he hated me, and Courtney knows exactly what I'm talking about. And then just a month or so ago, like after over 2 years knowing each other, and I'm the worst person he's ever met in his life, him and I had a perfectly fine conversation in the hallway. If you ever feel that they are mad at you, they're mad at the position. They're not mad at you. It's not a you thing. It's a position thing. They're always going to hate the position. It's a tough thing. It can be hard to accept and be comfortable with being the bad guy in some instances, but it's usually never you. It's usually the spot you're put in.
Except for Elena. She has a case, they're mad at her.
What did you know?
It's all her.
And then one last thing, there's also cases that I told Courtney. There was one case that I was in court for, and I was like, Courtney, I don't want this case because I don't think I can appropriately judge certain parts of it. So if you ever feel like I feel bad for saying I can't take a case, I told Courtney.
DCS trained at minimum standards, and you wouldn't cross the threshold.
And my minimum standard is higher And I recognized that, so I knew that I would not be able to go in this home and appropriately judge. So I told Courtney, I said, I will not take this case, because home conditions is one of the things, and I knew that me going in there, I'm just gonna, no, I think it's not good, and so I told Courtney, absolutely not want to.
Justin doesn't do bugs.
I don't, home conditions are what I call.
And on that, if you go into a home and you have concerns about the home conditions, and even though DCS chose to leave the kids in there and they think it's acceptable, we don't have to accept that. So you can keep bringing it to the attention of the team. You can keep saying to DCS, what are you doing to address these concerning home conditions? Maybe they need an increase in home-based casework. Maybe they need an increase in therapy because there's a mental illness that is getting in the way of their ability to address their home conditions. You don't have to stop bringing it up just because DCS thought it was appropriate to leave them there. And I've said it in court. Justin has said it in court. CASA does not subscribe to minimum standards. We are advocating for children to not have to live at minimum standards. So we don't have to say that that is acceptable. And we can keep voicing time. And we even have children that say, I don't want to live in this environment. I want my home to be cleaner. I don't want bugs crawling in my food. So we have every right to stand up and say, this child deserves better. So either put the services in place to address the problem or get the children out until the parents address the problem. Don't ever feel like you have to conform to the DCS standard and back down. It's not always comfortable, but that is 100% what our job is. Questions and answers, or lunch, you choose.
It's happening more often, so what downstream is causing this?
So the federal law changed about 2 years ago to Family First, Family Preservation Act, which basically means in order for DCS to get access to federal dollars, they have to leave children in home as much as possible. So prior to that, the federal funding went to foster homes and supporting and building up those foster homes. When the federal government changed that law and instituted this act, they feel like families thrive better when they stay together. So the thought is that there's substance abuse, but we're going to leave the child in the home and we're going to address the substance abuse without the removal, and that's less traumatic on the family and on the child. And so they are going out of their way to not remove at all. Sometimes it works, like Justin was talking about, educational neglect. I think you could almost always address that with the child in the home as long as the parents are willing to make change. I have a problem when there's not even a sober caregiver, because it used to be, well, there's one parent using, one parent not, so there's a sober caregiver in the home. When there's no sober caregiver, I have a problem with that. I think that the level of risk increases. However, that's also case specific, because you might have a 17-year-old who has two parents that are using. You need to remove them because they're not going to have anywhere to go. So it's all case specific, but it is because of the federal funding and the dollars. And they're not even really opening cases right now. If they do open that in-home chins, it's because they've even tried that informal adjustment for 6 months before that, and the parents are not cooperating. So it's concerning, and we share the concern, but we also have to adjust our advocacy to meet DCS where they are with that.
You don't want to be the bad guy. I don't mind it. So if you need someone, I'm used to it at this point.
It sounds like those are the kids that need us the most.
They are. They are. I mean, we in the office feel like if it's an in-home tent, it requires bi-monthly visits and not just once a month, because the child is still in a high-risk situation. And when you have parents with substance abuse and extreme mental illness, that can change. You could see them today and everything looks fine and safe, and then tomorrow they could spiral and then the child is unsafe. So with those cases, we do feel like it takes a greater level of attention, and there should probably be more CFTMs. There's definitely more service providers, you would hope, in the home, and we need to be there at least every other week just to say, okay, how are things now? Or do one visit with the child in school and then one in the home in the same month. So you're, seeing the child twice a month, because you're gonna probably get more from that child when you see them at school than when they're at home.
Quickly, like how would, if we have a case where our child's in an intervention and we see the condition worsening or our concerns grow, do the children really need to be removed? What is our course of action process?
So first you would want to reach out to the FCM, and hopefully when they hear your concerns, they're gonna share your concerns and they're gonna move quickly and get solutions. That doesn't always happen. So if you reach out to the FCM and they're just like, yeah, I knew about that, but it's in home, that's what we're doing, then include your case coordinator and they will elevate it to the supervisor of that FCM. Sometimes the supervisors don't really know what's happening in their cases. So you can elevate it to that supervisor. If they're still not happy with that, then the case coordinator is going to bring it to me, and we have resources. Either I will file a motion with the courts to say, we don't agree with what's going on and we want change. So he will hold a hearing and he will give us his opinion and maybe put some changes in place. And we also have an attorney that we use now. So if it's something that's even more not agreeing with PDs and DCS, we have avenues to make change so that we don't have to just sit there and say, oh, well, this is what DCS is doing and we have to accept it. So there's, always start with that FCM, because that's what's going to build your relationship with the team. But we'll just keep going up that chain of command. If you're not happy with what you hear from the FCM, and a lot of the FCMs, they don't want to fight with CASA. So if we bring something up like, hey, I have these concerns, then they're going to be like, okay, let's just add a whole nother day of home-based casework. So that puts more eyes in the home. I mean, they're going to hear you and they're going to try to work with you some, but then some FCMs are going to be like, nope, this is what I'm doing. And if you're not happy with that, then we'll just keep taking it higher until we get, at least, we might not always get a change. We might not always get an order that gives us what we want, but at least we're always going to be on record with what our concerns were. And then, heaven forbid, if something bad happened, they're going to go back to that record and they're going to say, CASA said this was a concern, and we're on record with it. So I think also, if you do end up getting a case that is out of home, you also have to be aware that it will likely quickly return to an in-home, because if they do have to remove the child, they are very quickly finding an avenue to put that child back in the home as soon as possible. So it's something to be aware of, that be mindful of the fact that you may be sitting in these homes with the children, and that is where the children meet us the most, I feel like. So any other questions?
Super quickly, we heard Justin say a minute ago that we might get in trouble if we don't call the hotline, but then I heard that in your escalation of what responses we may make, I didn't hear you say the hotline, so where does that fit in?
So here's an example of that. We had a case last week, and it's in the triage level, and trying to think of the exact details. Carrie observed something with the child that she was concerned with. So as we were talking about how is the best way to handle it, and I think it was the child had reported that the stepdad was corporal punishment, physically abusive. So Carrie and I talked about it. It's an open case already. That was already named as a reason within the open case. We're not quite sure if it was a new incident or if the child was referring to one of the original reasons that the case opened. So I told Carrie to call and report it to the FCM first. She did. And the FCM's response was, well, I remember her saying something about that, but I'm not really sure if she knows what she's talking about. So basically, we didn't feel comfortable with the FCM's response to us sharing that information. So then I said, go ahead and call the hotline. Start with the FCM. That facilitates that relationship with the FCM. And I think if it's an already open case, we owe it to the FCM to try to, and they could go that day and talk to the child and see if it's a new concern that needs to be addressed. But if it looks like they're not making that a priority and you feel like it's something that needs to be reported, then call the hotline. And do all of this with your case coordinator too, and they can help talk you through that, but ideally, you're gonna share that information and the FCM is gonna make time in their schedule that day to go and see the child, because that's what the hotline would do. Now, some of us have kids that reach out to us after hours and we can't reach the FCM. And we've had kids call that have run away and that they're scared, but they don't have anywhere to go. We've had kids report that mom is hallucinating and they don't feel safe in their home, and it's after hours. So if you can't reach an FCM, then you're going to call the hotline and report it. And anything that you hear that needs to be reported, it should be reported. But if it's already an open case, I think we should start with the FCM that's on the case. But you don't have to stop there.
I was gonna add to, we go over one case in particular in our national training where you have a child that's kind of like an outlier. He's not party to the case. That's originally, so maybe he was just like a stepchild. But the cause of suspected abuse. So because that child's not part of the case that you're working, that's a hotline call. You don't need to call an FCM for that. That child's unrelated. And we've seen cases like that where, you know, you have blended families and you have kids that have an open DCF case and other kids that are living in the home or kind of an outlier but not party to that case or a part of that open DCF case. If you see anything like that where you feel like there's something going on, that's a hotline call.
So like, think of it as like imminent safety risk. I would say if you can't get in touch with the FCM right away, you should make a hotline call. And if it's something which I don't fully remember what context that you were speaking about when they said call the hotline, but if it's like concerns about drug use where the children are already removed, to me that even though they're saying call the hotline, that doesn't make any sense because there's not imminent safety concerns and there's an open case. So I for sure would start with the FCM and the supervisor if you're not getting a response. And I know people are hesitant to contact DCS supervisors or anyone's supervisor, and I think that when your focus is the safety of the child and not maybe a grievance with how the FCM is handling the case, then it's well received even by the supervisor because they don't know the ins and outs of everything going on with their FCM cases.
Yeah, like if a parent shows up high to a supervised visit, it's a concern, but it's not a hotline call because there's a visit supervisor there that's keeping the child safe. We may not like it and you may want to report it to the FCM because that quality of visit isn't the best for the child, but you need to call the hotline for that. However, if a parent has an unsupervised visit with a child and you show up into their home to see the child and you feel like the parent is under the influence, that would be a hotline call or a call to that FCM or both, depending on the response that you get. So you really, and you're going to get beat up sometimes by the PDs either way, because I had a case where I was run through the ringer because I did make a hotline call and a welfare check to the police because that was harassing the parent. But then at the same time, I could say, well, I feel like the child is not safe in his current environment, and the PD is going to be like, but you didn't call the hotline. Some of the answers to that is felt safety versus physical safety. Some of it is the child's emotional safety is at risk. Do I think that the child is going to have to go to the emergency room for an injury? Perhaps no. But I don't think that they're emotionally safe in a home where there's domestic violence going on or, you know, that's between the parents and not at the child. So public defenders have not yet accepted emotional safety. They're not willing to agree that a child being in an environment where they're constantly being traumatized by non-physically threatening issues is a problem. And we are, I think, educating the public defenders on that because we have started talking about the ACEs scores when we give testimony, and we are talking regularly about, well, no, I don't think that there's a physical safety harm, but this emotional safety is very real and has a lasting effect on the child. So that you're not going to call the hotline necessarily for an emotional safety concern, but that's still a safety concern. So just don't let them reduce that in your mind. Any other questions? Okay, good.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and
get our lunch boxes. We have Jimmy John's today. Our lunch was sponsored by Graceland Church. Thank you for your lunch today. So I will tell them that you are appreciative of Jimmy John's. So just to go over our menu, there's a caprese sandwich, that's salami and mozzarella. There's veggie